All right, good morning, gentlemen. Yes, my name is David Cross, and I am so glad to be here. I've been looking forward to this for some time, so thank you, Marcus, for giving me this opportunity here. See if we have the slideshow. That'll come up in just a minute here. But I appreciate the invitation. I want to share a brief introduction to who I am. This is before the slides are up, so that's no problem. And what brings me here today? I've spent most of my career in missions work, missions to Muslims in particular, both in the Middle East as well as in the Midwest. When my wife and I started a team that focused on Arabs and Somalis in Minneapolis, and so we were working there. In the Middle East, my time was split between Bahrain and right on the border of the United Arab Emirates and Oman. And after a decade on the field or so on field side ministry, I accepted the role as VP of IT for Pioneers, and that's how I got to know Marcus when I heard his story and Bridget's story and got to see them go overseas. It was an exciting opportunity. But that was in Orlando, Florida, a little bit different than here in Wisconsin. And it was actually just last year that I moved here. I'll share a little bit about that in a minute, but I've been the president of a mission organization since about 2018 that's been focused on training missionaries to go overseas. My master's degree is in linguistics, and I have a passion for disciple-making movements, and also a passion for work and for helping people see the intrinsic value of their work. And so that's what you'll hear a bit about right here this morning. And then right in the middle, we'll be talking a lot about disciple-making movements, and so you'll have an opportunity to hear some of those stories. Well, I passed that role as president of Professionals Global on to my wife this past fall. One of the reasons that brings us up to Wisconsin, and then also for that precipitates that move to pass on that leadership to my wife, who obviously knows and has been involved in all of those stories and all of those different things, those activities that we've been a part of, was 2.5 years ago, I fell from a tree. I had a traumatic fall from a tree. In fact, you could say it was a near-death experience. By all accounts, my heart stopped, my breathing stopped by those people that were there, and yet I miraculously started breathing again just a few minutes later. I had been hiking with my children and spending some time with them, and we decided to stop in the midst of all these beautiful Spanish oaks in Florida, and I fell backward and hit the ground, and as I was tumbling, I broke multiple vertebrae. I got bulging discs, knocked unconscious, of course, and nerve damage, and a heart condition that came out of it as well. So a number of things, and that's why you don't see me wearing a mask today. I have the medical excuse because of that. But nonetheless, I've also had COVID in September, so you're okay. I'm not going to give you anything bad here. Well, by all accounts, it looks like my heart had stopped, and that precipitated a change. A change because I could no longer travel like I used to be doing with the mission agency that I was leading. And I tried for 9 months to return to work because work was so meaningful to me. Work was important. Here I was teaching other people about the value of work. And yet I couldn't do the work that I felt I was called to do. And so I had to look for another sort of ministry, a more local ministry. And that's what brought me back to Wisconsin. I'm originally from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and Burlington happens to be right between where I'm originally from and where my wife is from. So that made it a convenient place for us to be able to visit family and those sort of things. So the Lord has given me a unique blend of passion for the local church as well as for missions and for engaging people in the work that they're doing, everyday normal people. Now, most people are normal people. Some people, you're normal, I'm normal. Well, some of you may be abnormal. I may be abnormal. In fact, I woke up this morning and I put on my jeans and found that my dog had chewed some holes in it. See, I'm normal just like everybody else. And that's what I wanted to engage and connect with people in, for example, the book that I'll be sharing here. One of the books I wrote was more missions-minded, and that was Mondays in the Middle East, the lighter side of Arabian Nights. They're humorous stories of East meets West culture clash, and they come from my time overseas. And then Work of Influence, Principles for Professionals from the book of Daniel. And that's where I want to engage professionals, engage everyday normal people in the work that they're doing so that they can see the intrinsic value and the importance of everyday work. I mean, we all benefit from somebody who put in an HVAC system and a heating system. We all benefit from somebody who put in lighting and electricity and plumbing. Those are not secondary, ancillary sort of jobs. That work serves all of us. And that's what we'll be connecting with today. And one of the other books that I'm now 15 out of the 17 chapters completed and hoping that this will be published soon is The Integral Life, Complete Passion and Purpose for God. So it's taking that intrinsic value of work and seeing how does that become an example for others, for non-believers, to see when we apply that same approach toward our family and toward our marriages, toward our church, toward our community, all of those different areas. But today, we're looking at the case for work. Let's see if you got it. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll need to figure that because I don't want to put that all that burden on you. But anyway, the case for work, and that brings us to the discussion for today. What are we here for? What's the purpose in life? How do I know that I'm doing what God wants me to do? Why is chocolate so tasty? These are important questions, and answering these questions will help you to live a more fulfilled, complete life. And that's what we're focused on. I don't know about that chocolate question, but the meaning of life, yeah, we got this. Okay, so I'm going to start with what's called the two towers. Hey, I think I got it. All right, the first one is the Tower of Babel. Now, most people are familiar with the Tower of Babel, and it's because it's the place where we see languages created as a response to the extreme hubris, to the intense pride of the people of the Tower of Babel. Let me read here from this Tower of Babel, this story that we have here. Genesis 11, the whole earth had a common language and a common vocabulary. When the people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Then they said to one another, now here's the key, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. And they said, come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered across the face of the earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the people had started building. And the Lord said, if as one people, all sharing a common language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be beyond them. Come, let's go down and confuse their language so they won't be able to understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there across the face of the entire earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the entire world, and from there the Lord scattered them across the face of the entire earth. Now there are a few things when we look at that we have to pick up on. This is Genesis chapter 11, so it's removed from Genesis chapter 1 and 2, but I want to point out that this was not just something to gloss over. These commandments that come from Genesis chapter 1 and 2 that we'll get to in just a moment here. These people wanted to make a name for themselves. They did not want to be scattered across the face of the earth. They wanted to build a tower whose top was into heaven. Now, those are some key things, so let's take a look at what each of those things do. But before I get to that, I want to share a little bit of a story because obviously this is language that we're talking about here. This is where language comes into play. And language is important to me. I spent a couple of years studying Arabic, and so while I was living in the Middle East, I was studying, and before going over to the Middle East, I was studying Arabic. And when I came back from the Middle East, I had a bunch of sinus problems. And so back in Fond du Lac, a doctor, Will Sabisma, he went to our church. He took good care of me and everything. Well, he was helping me out with this. And after the sinus surgery, I was still having problems. And so he kind of looked around. He's like, wow, you have a really long uvula. Now, what is a uvula? I think I have a picture in here of a uvula. Maybe I don't. But when you open up your mouth, it's that thing that dangles right in the back there, okay? It's not something that we talk about every day. But he said, you have a really long uvula, so maybe that's what the problem is with your sinuses. Okay, so he says, you don't need the uvula, so let's just trim that thing right off. Okay, the dreadful day comes, and he pulls out a needle. I mean, the thing had to have been 2 or 3 inches long. It was because it needed to reach straight back, and he just injects right into my uvula. Wow! I thought he went straight into my spinal column is the way it felt. But he injected this Novocaine straight in there. Okay, just wait for a few minutes. All right, now I can't feel anything. Then he pulls out the cauterizing knife. I didn't know how he was going to do this thing, and he's cauterizing. But think about this. This is burning flesh emanating from my mouth. And where does the smoke go to? To my nose. And so he's moving right along, and I'm just like smelling this burning flesh, and I could not help it. And I gagged, like this. And as soon as I did that, he grazed the side of my mouth with this cauterizing knife. Oh my goodness. Then I really jumped because I didn't have any Novocaine on the side of my mouth. And so I'm jumping all over the place. And he stops for a minute because here he had put this clamp on in order to hold it in place. And he'd hung this clamp outside of my mouth. And so here I am in the seat just panting like this. My heart rate's probably through the ceiling. I'm sweating. He's like, "You okay?" "Yeah, okay." And so he goes at it again. Well, this time I saw him coming. I was gripping that seat, and I was pushing back so forcefully that as soon as he started doing this, I broke the seat. The whole thing breaks loose, and sure enough, he's going all over, just cauterizing. And finally, I get through this half uvula to a full uvula that's taken out. And he said, "Well, that's the first time that's happened." I would say so. Yeah, it's the first time. But the way this is connected to the sound is that he was right. In English, you need a uvula. We don't have uvular sounds. However, in Arabic, there are about 6 sounds that are uvular, guttural sounds. And overnight, I had a speech impediment in Arabic. I could not make those sounds anymore. It was devastating to me because I'm a linguist. I'm a person who takes that carefully. And yet, the good doctor helped me with this in a way that maybe I didn't want that help. But nonetheless, this is all about the establishment of languages. Languages was a confusion of a single language for the purpose of scattering people across the face of the earth. Well, that's interesting. So let's take a look at what this means in relation to Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. So Genesis chapter 1 says this: "Then God said, 'Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness.'" After whose likeness? After God's likeness. Not after the name of man. Remember, that's what they wanted to build, a name for themselves. "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness, so they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the cattle and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move on the earth." God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that moves on the ground." And then moving forward a few verses into Genesis chapter 2, we read this: "The Lord God took the man and placed him in the orchard in Eden to care for it and to maintain it." So these people wanted to build a name for themselves in Genesis 11. They wanted to reach the very top of heaven, to take the seat of God. That is extreme hubris. On the other hand, what's the opposite of that? Making a name for God, bringing him glory. What I'm going to do here, and this is where this slide will be the challenge here. This is where it's going to be a lot of clicking, and you can feel free to move right through, and I'll just work right along. We start with what is called the glory of God, and I put this in Greek. Oh, well, here we go. We can look at all of it there, and I'll just look at it this. This describes life's purpose, life's aim, life's goal. You can ignore the things on the side. We'll look right at the beginning or at the middle here. Heidoxe tou theou. That's the Greek phrase for the glory of God. When we look at what God was doing, even in making creation, even in making humankind the chief of his creation, he was doing this for his glory. The Westminster Catechism says, what is the chief aim of man? It's to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And so that's where things start with. And then this next phrase, imago Dei, that's the Latin phrase of the image of God. We are made in the image of God. Again, that is for God's glory. We reflect the character and nature of God for God's glory. Well, how do we do that? There are really three ways that we could see. And when we look at Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, what had God done at that point that we could gather, this is what God's about? Well, he had obviously created everything from nothing. When you create something from nothing, where there is nothing, you make something new, we call that art. And then God had brought things in his mercy. He had brought things into order. He had given us, for example, the sun, the moon, the stars, the things that we guide our day by, so that we have 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime by his grace, by his mercy. That we have seasons, that we have weeks, even that every week that we could give one day just as a relaxation day. Or seasons that we could count the years, and we have the year of Jubilee where God calls on us for rest. All of those express God's order, and that he is a God of order. He gave us order. And he gave us care. God didn't put Adam and Eve into the Sahara. He didn't drop them into the Antarctic. He didn't even drop them into the middle of a rainforest or just some thicket, someplace like Wisconsin might be. God cared for them. He planted a garden himself. He gave them everything they needed to survive, yes, and to thrive. God showed his care toward his people. So we can group those things into three areas: art, order, and care. And that is where we get this sense of mission for God's people, is to express the character and nature of God, to make his name great across the whole earth, to subdue the earth, to rule over it. And those come with particular commands. These are the commands that he gave us. 7 commands. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue the earth, rule the earth, care for it, and maintain it. And even if you look at those three, what you see is this grouping: be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Well, that's kind of related to God's creative nature. Subdue the earth and rule over it by the very act of him commanding Adam to make to name all of the animals. That's bringing order. That's a very scientific thing that he had Adam do. That's subduing the earth and ruling over it. To care for it and to maintain it. That again is ascribing his care for us. And we are to model what we see in God. Well, when we look at this, we look at it through the sense of our vocations. We can see again that all of these different things that we do, all of these vocations, the things that we're called to, occupations, the things that we occupy ourselves with, all of those can be lined up with art, order, and care. So, for example, entertainers, yes, you can have pure, undefiled entertainment. That is an expression of our creative nature, that nature that God put into us. Teachers, the creation and dissemination of knowledge. That's building up the knowledge of the world that we live in. When teachers pass that on, and when they teach their students the scientific method, for example, that's the creation and dissemination of knowledge. How about an inventor? Thomas Edison. He's making something from nothing, and in doing that, he's reflecting the character and nature of God. Parents, well, there's a pretty obvious thing: be fruitful and multiply. I'm pretty good at that. I have 5 kids. I heard somebody here, Doug, has 4. So that is something as well, that is be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The beginning of our mission place, the place where we want people to know the Lord, is right in our own family. Well, let's look at some other vocations. Some that reflect this sense of order, subduing and ruling over the earth.